Hey everyone, it's Rena. Two things. First, I am officially on spring break, which is awesome, and I'm so excited that I get a break from school and I get a break from stress for like a week. So that'll be really nice. I'll make another video about that, I think. So this past week has been midterms, and that's been ridiculously busy for me. For my costume design class, we had an assignment called Replay, I think. We essentially had to make up a character based on a segment of text, and after that we had to make a garment reflecting who that character was and what the text was about. Choosing a text for me was really hard because I was up to my neck in song lyrics and trying to narrow it down. I finally narrowed it down to 2 lines of a Kelly Clarkson song, and I ended up making a dress out of paper bags. And I decided, you know, why not? I'm gonna document how I made it. So this video is pretty much a step-by-step process video on how I made a dress out of paper and nothing else. Well, paper and hot glue and a little bit of watercolor. So, without further ado, here we go. So I started out by taking the paper bags and laying them out and undoing the glue on them to make them into just paper sheets to work with. And then I took some parchment paper, this is the brand I used, and I cut it into like 1.5 inch to 2 inch wide strips, and I folded it lengthwise in thirds and then in half from there, I think, and you can see it on the end. And that just made it a lot easier to work with. And my goal for this was making lacing to use, so I decided to make it into something like twine. And so I took those strips that I cut and twisted, and then I just knotted them end to end, and it made this longer lacing. And then right here you can see me just twisting it into that twine-like thing. So I started on one end, and then I flipped it around in my hands to make it easier to twist the rest of it down. The twist makes it a lot stronger too. And then right here you can just see me doing an overhand knot on the joint between the new piece of twine that I twisted and the string that I made. And I made a lot of this stuff. And I ended up having to remake some of it because the knots made it hard to lace. I started kind of like a skein of yarn actually, as only I would. So once I got to the studio, what I did with the paper bags was just cut off that jagged edge because it kept ripping on its own, and so a clean edge was much easier to work with. And here I think I was taping the bodice, which was just the area that went around the waist. It was 6 inches in length, and in width I have no idea, but it was wide enough to go most of the way around the body, about 3/4 of the way around I would say, with room for lacing in the back. And here you can kind of see how I ended up pinning it onto the mannequin, and that's the space I left in the back. And then for the bust, I crumpled up 2 7x12 pieces of the paper and used those. It took a little bit of fiddling to get it to work. Sorry about the video, by the way. I don't really know what happened. I think it corrupted a little bit when I transferred it over to my computer, but I worked it into a shape I was happy with, and then cut off the excess to make it actually work with the shape of the mannequin. And it worked pretty well in the end. And yeah. And I just kind of did the same on both sides. And here you can see the pinning up close. I did have to do a mini dart on the side to make it work. Then I took the bodice off and marked it 1 inch apart for each of the holes for the lacing, and I ended up hot gluing all the seams and taking the tape off. And let me tell you, hot glue guns are evil. I have some burn marks to prove it. And then while I had the bodice down, I took the bust pieces down and marked where I wanted them and taped them and then glued them in place. The bust pieces ended up being about 1 inch away from the center on either side. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I had to redo some of the lacing. This is why, because the knots were too big to fit through the holes, and so I ended up hot gluing some twine together instead of knotting it. It seemed to work well enough, and it looked good. And then here's the final lacing after I added on a little bit more. And then I didn't want to let the handles go to waste either, and they came in handy for little details. I'll show you later towards the end what I use them for mainly. But I also use them for the halter, like, attachments, I guess, for the bust. And so I made them into these short little loops, and I glued them in place with hot glue, and then used these binder clips to keep them there while they hardened. They worked pretty well, actually. I ended up taking the twine I made earlier with the knots in it and looping it back and forth around the neck, and I made a halter. So here's the front of the halter, and here's the back. And I think it turned out pretty cool, actually. Oh, maybe I lied. Sorry, it's not quite towards the end, but I ended up also using the bag handles as sort of a fence type of thing in the front of the bust. So I cut the handles into 4 different lengths and glued them in this fashion. The text I used had this imagery of something bursting out from a gate, so I used watercolor to sort of portray that on this segment. And it didn't turn out quite exactly as I'd hoped. I really liked the drips that I did on this part. But I originally pictured myself just using blue, and I think bringing the red into it actually really helped. And I'm actually quite happy with how the final result turned out, so yeah. And last but certainly not least, the skirt. So I did the front and back both with a full piece of bag, crumpled up to make it more like fabric, and I folded each of the cleanly cut edges over to the wrong side and glued them in place. And for some masochistic reason, I decided to make a pleated skirt, so I marked the pleats 6 inches apart and went from there. So you can see the measurements specifically of each of the pleats here, and what they looked like when they were folded. And again, I used the binder clips to hold them in place while I was hot gluing them, and once they were all done, I used the handles to reinforce all of the pleats on the wrong side. This also made it a lot easier to attach the skirt. And this is what it looked like after I had attached the first half. I did the same on the back, but before I did, I also glued a handle in place underneath the lacing to close the gap and make a skirt attachable. Once I'd finished gluing it down, there was still this gap between the front and back of the skirt, so I filled that in underneath with some parchment paper. And that was it! I was all done. This whole project took me only about 5.5 hours to complete, and I'm really proud of how it turned out, actually. It didn't have to be wearable, but I wanted to make it so that it could be wearable in theory. So that about wraps it up. If you like this video, feel free to leave a rating or a comment. That's always very much appreciated. And if you want to see more of my face or my paper dresses and hear more about my life and stuff, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye!